Hi, I'm Sarah Wiskirchen, and today I'm going to be discussing Community Eligibility Provision, which is commonly referred to as CEP. So we're going to go over the overview and eligibility of Community Eligibility Provision and discussing how to determine if it is beneficial for your district or school to participate. So to begin, what is CEP? CEP allows high poverty LEAs, which is also known as local education agencies, and schools to serve free meals to all enrolled students for a period of 4 consecutive school years without using school meal applications. It also relies on data matching from other assistant programs like Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, also known as SNAP, and Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, also known as TANF. And schools that have adopted CEP are reimbursed using a formula based on the percentage of students participating on other need-based programs, such as the SNAP, TANF. And with CEP, it can be implemented district-wide through individual schools or through a group of schools. And we're going to be going into more detail about all of those in future slides. So what are the benefits to participating in CEP? A few benefits for students would be that free healthy meals are provided at school. There's no stigma attached, and there's less time spent in cashier's lines since all the meals are provided free. A few benefits for parents are that there's no household application, and there's no worry about meal accounts. And that is also variable to the district. If a la carte sales or whatnot are being charged to meal accounts, those still might be there. But specifically for the lunch and breakfasts, then that would not be applicable. And then some benefits for schools would be that it reduces paperwork and administration time, streamlined service, participation increases, and it also improves students' learning. And an example of participation increase would be with St. Louis City during their first year of participating with CEP. They saw an increase of 8% in their lunch participation and a 3% increase for their breakfast participation. So keep that in mind as well if you're considering CEP. So who is eligible for CEP? So if you have an identified student percentage, also known as ISP, of at least 40% as of April 1st, you would be eligible to participate. If you provide breakfast and lunch to all students at no charge by participating in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program, you will be reimbursed using a formula based on the ISP. Count total breakfasts and total lunches served to students daily. Agree that the school will not collect household applications from parents. And agree to cover any costs exceeding reimbursement through non-federal funds. And all of these bullet points we will be going through in more detail in future slides. So to begin going through the ISP. So how is ISP calculated? So to get the identified student percentage, you would take the number of identified students and you would divide that by the total number of enrolled students. You would then multiply that by 100 to get the percentage that would determine your identified student percentage. And when determining the ISP, LEAs should not round, so keep that in mind as well. So to break down the ISP, you might be wondering, what is an identified student? So an identified student is defined as students who are directly certified for free school meals without an application and are not subject to verification. So this includes students directly certified through SNAP, TANF, or in foster care and are listed on the direct certification or near match files, which would also have the name as direct match or zip code file. Students who are directly certified through classification by SNAP and TANF extended eligibility homeless and runaways on the liaison lists, migrant youth, and enrolled in Head Start. And what is an enrolled student? An enrolled student is defined as students who are enrolled in attending schools and who have access to at least one meal service daily. So after viewing and discussing the ISP calculation, you might be wondering if your ISP is high enough for my program to be successful. So CEP is designed to be financially viable for schools in high poverty communities. So when considering participating in CEP, keep in mind the ISP that we just talked about, the standard versus CEP reimbursement rates, and the impacts across the entire LEA. We're now going to look at the CEP comparison calculator tool, and this can be found on our DESE webpage through this Community Eligibility Provision tab. So with this tool, this is basically a screenshot of what you will see when you access the tool. And it provides information for your district, and then also breaks down the difference between traditional method and community eligibility provision method. We are now going to take a look at your CEP comparison calculator tool. So this tool can be accessed through the DESE webpage, the Food and Nutrition section, and there is a quick link on the next slide where you can access this tool directly. And what this tool does is that it compares the standard operating procedures versus the community eligibility procedures. So it allows you basically to input information from your school or district to basically compare the traditional method versus the CEP method to see if it would be beneficial for you to participate in CEP. So it would break it down per month, and we'll ask for specifics that we are going to go into now. So what you would begin doing is, if you are approved for the 0.06, you would say yes or no. If you're a severe need lunch, you would put yes or no. Severe need breakfast, yes or no. And then the anticipated percentage increase in breakfast and the anticipated percentage increase in lunch. And the next thing it would ask is for your standard operating procedures or traditional method, for you to input your total meals claimed for free, reduced, and paid breakfasts. So on this left side, it would be specific for breakfast, and on the right side, it asks for the total meals claimed for free, reduced, and paid lunches. So you would input that into the yellow boxes. You would then input your student prices for your reduced price and paid price breakfasts into those yellow boxes, and you would do the same for your lunches. So the student prices for your reduced price and paid lunches into the yellow boxes. And these white boxes would auto-populate to give you the total breakfast revenue and the total lunch revenue. You would then make your way down the tool to look at the Community Eligibility Provision method to input your number of enrolled students for that month and your identified students for that month into the yellow boxes as seen here. That then would auto-populate all of these white boxes to give you your percentage of identified students, your percentage of meals reimbursed at the free rate, your percentage of meals reimbursed at the paid rate, and so on. And at the end of the tool, as we don't have pictured down here, it will state if it is beneficial for you to participate in CEP or not. So I believe that this tool is a great resource for districts or schools that are just basically wanting to see if it would be beneficial to participate in CEP. It gives a very good breakdown of how you would calculate that based on how you're already practicing with the standard operating procedures versus what would be if you were to participate in CEP. And here is that link to the DESE webpage, Food and Nutrition Services. That would take you directly to Community Eligibility Provision page, where this tool is accessible. And it also has other manuals and documents that are also very good to reference if you have any specific questions about CEP. We're now going to take a look at the ISP calculation worksheet. So the ISP calculation worksheet is needed to be completed by the local education agency for each of the buildings or building that is wanting to participate in CEP. So you can see here that there are some lines that are blue and some that do not have that blue. You'd want to input information into all of the blue areas, and you would also want to input the year that you're using for your data as of April 1st. And here you can see the number of identified students has a column. So this is where you would input the number of identified students that are directly certified through SNAP, directly certified through the near match SNAP, the MOSIS file, who are who are identified students through the extended eligibility SNAP, and so on and so forth through TANF, Head Start, Foster. And real quickly, I want to cover the difference between the foster section. So some students that are foster will appear on the MOSIS file. And then there's also students that are foster through documentation from the state and local foster agencies, confirming that they are foster students. So keep that in mind with these two sections, that there is a difference between directly certified foster and documentation from the state and local foster agencies. And then you would want to input the total number by building of the identified students, and then total number by building of the enrolled students. And this will give you the ISP for that specific building. This ISP calculation worksheet can be found through that link from the previous slide. That will take you to the DESE webpage, to Food and Nutrition Services, and then to the Community Eligibility Provision section. And it will be labeled as the ISP calculation worksheet. The ISP percentage, this basically breaks down the percentage of identified students and compares it to the percentage reimbursement rate, the free rate of reimbursement, and the percentage of the paid rate for reimbursement. So let's say that after completing that ISP worksheet, you found that building A had a 55% of identified students. The percentage reimbursement rate at the free rate would be 88%, and the percentage reimbursed at the paid rate would be 12%. So this is a kind of little cheat sheet that you can use to determine your reimbursements for participating with CEP based off of your ISP percentage. However, when do LEAs have to cover operating costs? So when the level of federal reimbursement received under CEP, Provision 2 or 3, and or standard operating procedures is less than the cost of providing all students free meals. That is whenever the LEAs are responsible to cover all other operating costs that are not covered underneath that reimbursement. So keep that in mind as well when considering participating in CEP and looking at your ISPs and the percentages that you would be reimbursed for the free and paid rate. How does grouping work? So if you think back to the beginning of this presentation that we mentioned grouping, that you could do it district-wide, individual schools, or through grouping. And grouping allows for schools that would not be eligible individually to participate in CEP. So the group ISP must be at least 40% to be eligible. And to calculate the group ISP, always use the raw data. So with grouping, you can combine school buildings and basically come to an identified student percentage using that group of buildings. So at the bottom of the slide, you can see an example of that, where we have an example elementary, an example middle, an example. So it looks like in this example, they're wanting to group these 3 buildings. So the number of identified students for the example elementary is 201. The number of enrolled students for the example elementary is 356, and that would give you an identified student percentage of 56.46%. And you would do the same for the middle and high school, and that will give you a grand total of the identified student percentage of 55.55%. And that meets that minimum mark of 40% for that group of buildings for their ISP percentage. So how are meals claimed and reimbursed? So the equation that we would use to get that amount claimed would be, we would take your ISP, we'll multiply it by 1.6. That 1.6 is a multiplier which approximates the free/reduced percentage of applications that were still collected. And it equals the percentage of the total meals served reimbursed at the free rate. An example of this calculation is provided at the bottom of this slide, where they discuss school A, B, and C, which has an ISP of 50% with a meal count of 2,000 meals per month. So how to determine the free rate? We would take the percentage of meals reimbursed. So we would take 50, which is your ISP, multiply that by 1.6, which is the given, and that would equal 80%. We would then take your total number of meals counted for that month, which would be 2,000. We would multiply that by that percentage of 80%, and we would equal 1,600 meals at that number reimbursed. So we would claim 1,600 meals at the free rate for reimbursement. Paid would be calculated by taking 100%, take away that 80% that we previously calculated, which would total 20%. We would then take the total meal counts for that month, which is 2,000, and we would multiply that by that 20%, which would equal 400 for the number of meals reimbursed at the paid rate. So, thusly, we would be able to claim 400 meals at the paid rate. Keep in mind that if the total percentage for free and paid meals do not equal 100%, the paid category must be adjusted to make that percentage 100%. So how are meals calculated for monthly claims? Free and paid claiming percentages, you would carry the calculation to a minimum of 2 decimal places. Using the standard rounding, which is numbers 5 and above, round up to the next higher number, numbers 4 and below, round down. And the meals claimed must be made in a whole number for submitted claims for reimbursement. When the free or paid meal calculations result in partial meals, use standard rounding procedures to determine the whole numbers of meals. So this is the example form for your daily meal count for CEP. So this is provided through our DESE Food and Nutrition Services webpage, and this basically gives an example of how you can count meals with CEP, since all meals are provided free. So this would need to be completed for each meal service during each day that is participating with CEP. So you can see here that it states you want to mark boxes with an X or circle for each student that receives a reimbursable meal. And that is where you would do that for meals that are reimbursable through 1 through 375. And we understand that sometimes this isn't quite enough space for that, so feel free to make your own forms that are similar to this, or get another form and do it that way, and then you can add those together at the end of the meal service to get your total meal counts for that meal service. Also, I want to bring your attention to the non-reimbursable meals served and the adult meals served. There is a section for those, and then it also has a section for your total student meals served, your total non-reimbursable meals served, and your total adult meals served. So keep that in mind that with CEP, it is a little easier at your point of service, since it does alleviate taking like the student's name, charging their account and whatnot, because with CEP, all meals are provided free to those students that are enrolled. So this would also alleviate the amount of time that those students are waiting in the point of service to put in their information, and it gives them a little bit more time to eat their meal and go about their business for the school day. Another thing to consider with CEP is that you will still need to complete the verification report annually, by the due dates, of course. So right here is a screenshot of the verification report that will need to be completed. So you would need to complete the section 2, which is SFAs with schools operating alternate provisions. And you would also need to complete section 3, only 3.1, where you would check the box for schools and or RCCIs, and the SFA were not required to perform direct certification with SNAP for non-base years provision 2/3 or provision or CEP for all schools. So keep that in mind for each school year to complete the verification report, because you will be notified if we have not seen one submitted. So how do I enroll my LEA if I decide that CEP is beneficial? So you want to take your April 1st, establish your ISP, so you want to take that data and just basically establish that ISP and complete the ISP worksheet that we walked through earlier. On April 15th, you want to complete the school level data, the CEP report. And by June 30th, you want to notify DESE of your intent to participate. So submit the CEP policy statement, the application packet, and ISP supporting documentation. And we'll be in communication with you about these documents as well. So this is basically a step-by-step, the flow of CEP throughout the school years. So your original ISP is established from April 1st data in the school year prior to CEP implementation. Then your original ISP is valid for the 4 consecutive years following. And then LEAs are required to conduct a data match between SNAP records and student enrollment records at CEP schools at least once annually. So what if you were to have changes during your 4-year cycle? So LEAs may return to standard operating procedures at any time during the cycle. And during the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years, LEAs may select the higher of the identified student percentage from the year directly prior or the year prior to the 1st year of operating CEP. Also keep in mind that if you decide that you no longer would like to participate in CEP because of the numbers, the state agency must provide schools/LEAs that are dropping out in the middle of the school year at least 30 days to transition back to standard operating procedures. Now we're going to go into record keeping. So anything used to fill out the identified student percentage ISP calculation worksheet for CEP participation will need to be kept on file. So you would want to keep your direct certification download list, the extended eligibility documentation, the official documentation for homeless, foster, migrant, Head Start, and any other categorical eligibility documentation used to determine the ISP, documentation of total enrollment used to establish the ISP, and the ISP worksheet/worksheets for the data year. The backup documentation must be retained for the entire period the school operates under CEP plus 3 years after the final claim submission under this claiming percentage. This includes retaining required records that support the calculation of the base year ISP. So how does CEP work with other education funding and child nutrition programs? So we're going to begin going through a couple. The first one we're going to go through is the basic funding formula calculation. The free reduced lunch, also known as FRL, count is based on the numbers reported by the district in the year prior to participating in CEP. This calculation is determined the year an LEA elects to become CEP in at least one building. Also keep in mind there is more information regarding the upcoming slides and the basic funding formula calculation in the school finance section at DESE and also on the CEP manual that is found on our DESE Food and Nutrition's webpage. So how does CEP work with Title I? So LEAs operating under CEP are directed to use the prior year's ISP and multiply by 1.6 to determine the measure of poverty by building. And how does CEP work with E-rates? So all LEAs operating under CEP will replace the free and reduced eligible numbers with their ISP by building. The calculation used for E-rate will multiply the ISP by the USDA multiplier of 1.6. How does CEP work with Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program and the after-school snack? So with Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, the individual building's ISP is multiplied by the 1.6 to award funds. And with after-school snack, after the first year, individual school level ISP is multiplied by 1.6 to determine if area eligible. And how does CEP work with the Summer Food Service Program and Seamless Summer Option? So with the Summer Food Service Program, you must use individual school level data. So you would take that ISP, multiply it by 1.6, and it must be 50% or greater to be area eligible. And you would want to contact the Department of Health and Senior Services for more information about the Summer Food Service Program. And then with Seamless Summer Option, you must use individual school level data. So you would take that ISP and you would multiply it by the 1.6, and it must be 50% or greater to be area eligible. And this is an example of our references and additional resources that we have used for this presentation, and you can find it through the USDA Community Eligibility Provision Center through this link, or through our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education with Community Eligibility Provision through the following link as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at DESE Food and Nutrition Services, and thank you for your time.